Hey everyone, it's Stacey. Let's chat about King Richard with Will Smith, and it's a story about Venus and Serena Williams and their dad. And it's really focused on like his obsession and his unorthodox methods to kind of get his children to be the tennis champs that they are. And it's a complicated, like I liked it because they did not, they don't give you answers. They show a really complex picture of a guy. It's kind of like reading the Bible where you're like, well, they tell me what happened, but I'm not, was this good or bad? Like, how are we supposed to see that? Like, Lord, what do you think about that? Because there's no commentary. It's just like, here's the story and you've got to decipher. And that's kind of how I felt about in this movie. Like, okay, I left still going, I'm not sure what was good and bad about this. So it's good because they did not oversimplify anything. I don't think. I think they really showed the complexities of things. But in a nutshell, I mean, he said he had like, I don't know, a 69-page plan drawn up before his kids were even born for them to be tennis superstars, which sounds absurd. Like, how do you know if your kids are going to even have an athletic bone in their body? Like, you could have that plan for some kids and it would be worth nothing. But yet his plan for his kids totally worked, which makes me wonder, like, at what point did he get some sort of prophetic download from the Lord about the lives of his daughters that were coming, that they would be tennis superstars? He had other kids. He saw them being doctors and lawyers, whatever, but he didn't write this up for the other kids. It was just for these two before they were born. So again, it's kind of like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? I don't know. But it was fascinating. And his plan is kind of extreme. And so he definitely did not follow the standard path for getting your kids promoted. Like, he took them out of the amateur circuit, and they're like, nobody goes pro unless you've already been playing matches. And you do that at the amateur level. You get sponsors, you get coaches, and then he was a pill for everyone around him because he got a coach, but then totally was subverting him at every corner and saying, we're not going to do it this way. And a lot of that was because he wanted to protect his kids. He was looking at the attitudes and the things of other kids, how they were getting burned out. He was like, I want my kids to have fun. I want them to be children. I don't want them to get proud of their victories. I want them to stay humble. And all of this is because, and he was from Compton, so he's like desperate to keep them off the street. So he gets written up for abuse because people don't think it's right that he's working them so hard, that he's got them out in the middle of the night in the rain, whatever, practicing. And yet he was like, and this is a good point, like, all these other kids are getting in trouble with drugs. They're getting, all these different, they're in the gangs, unwanted pregnancies, whatever, because their parents are absent. And yet you're coming after me for pushing my kids. He's like, I'm going to keep doing this. This is right, because we're going to stay involved, because we're going to get our kids out of this place. They're not going to stay here. They're not going to become another statistic. And you got to wonder, like, at what point is the line from being a good involved parent to being crossing the line and being controlling or even abusive? And yet it can be coming from a really good place. So where's that line of like being involved and being crazy town? So I don't know. I don't think the movie really answers that. But here's the interesting thing. All of his predictions come true. Like, they do become the best tennis champs ever. And they do it in a completely unorthodox way that is not the ways that the world says to do things. And so I guess a couple things that come to mind if we're going to try to connect this to the Bible and look for spiritual parallels. And literally this one just came to me, like, literally as I'm recording this, as I've been praying about it. I'm like, I don't even know how to tie this to the Bible. Like, there's things, but like, I'm like asking the Lord, is there some sort of father who had, or a parent who had ambition for their child that was borderline? I mean, you could argue Joseph, his dad, and the favoritism that he showed the baby and whatever, but his dad wasn't really a part of, because he was sold into slavery. So, I mean, I've been grasping, and I'm sure there's some great examples. They're not coming to mind. But right now, as I'm talking, this comes to mind. This is why I do this, because I love it. Because God, as I ponder, things just like come to the surface that I never would have even thought of. But Daniel, when he was in captivity, going to the captors, and there was this whole formula to make them the best, the smartest, whatever, to make them fit for the king's service. And he was like, we're not going to do it that way. This is not what God has called us to. He wants us to eat kosher. He wants us to do these different things, and that's not part of our diet. So the diet you have us on doesn't mesh with my spiritual upbringing. So he goes and he petitions, I would like to do things this way. And he goes on the Daniel fast. It's popularly called now. But he asks, and they're like, we can't let you eat that way because that's not going to get you to this place of success. And so he says, let me try it for 10 days. And see, or however, I think it was 10 days. Anyways, let me try it for this period of time. And at the end of the time, test us. At the end of that period, they were superior in every way to everyone around them. They were smarter, they were better built, they were more athletic, like all the things. They were far superior in every way to all of their counterparts. And so they were allowed to stay in that. And if I could be wrong, but I think they actually put everybody on the Daniel fast diet during that because it had such results. So that just comes to me like that is a great parallel, that he had this way that he felt. And there's some indication that maybe at least his wife definitely had a faith, but was he following the Lord? Was he not? I don't know. But again, sometimes the Lord asks us to do things that are completely countercultural for our family. And I was even talking with a friend about, she was like, well, we've got to get our kids in this sport, and this sport, and this sport so that they can get ahead, so they can get college scholarships. Like we've got to get, and her husband was like, we want family time. I don't care if they don't get scholarships. We're going to trust the Lord with that, but we're going to pull our kids back. We're going to do one thing. That's it. And because we're going to protect our family time. And she was really worried that it would hurt their kids, like future, possibilities. And we started talking about Daniel, and like, this is countercultural, but if the Lord wants to promote your children, he will do it. And he can give them supernatural ability. He can make them really great in a sport when the time is right, whether or not they've been investing in it since the time they were 3 months old, like we do now. And so like trusting the Lord with doing things that is not the world's way of doing things, and trusting him to promote us. And so, I think that's a great lesson that kind of comes out of this. He had such a sense of conviction, and I don't know where that came from, but the other thing I would say was amazing was not only that he did things according to his internal compass, according to what he felt was right, and how it paid off in the long run, promoting his children, getting them to that place that they both became exactly what he predicted they would be from before they were born, which is amazing. But the other thing I saw was that he continued to speak life into his kids all the time. So he would be asking, he would tell them since they were little, someday somebody's going to put a check for $1 million in your hand, maybe millions of dollars. Like they're going to write you checks. Sure enough, Reebok writes his kid she's 15 years old. She got a $12 million sponsorship from them. For her to be their spokesperson or whatever. She was 15 and had still not actually won. I mean, she came in runner up in that first pro tournament. Nobody had even heard of her before that. And just amazing. So these predictions all came true, but they would drive through a neighborhood and he was like, you'll be able to buy any house you want in this neighborhood. Before long, you just wait. And he's like, you guys are going to be the champions. You're going to be the best in the world. And he would just speak those things. And again, it can sound crazy and it's a lot of pressure. Like, you're telling your kid they have to be the #1 world pro, or like what happens if that becomes their worth or their value? But yet he was also the one, when you see the other kids in these tournaments having meltdowns because they weren't the best, and he's like, I've never been more proud of you. You had character, you had integrity, like don't worry, your day will come. So he was not in a hurry to get them there. He was willing to wait. And I think that he was really big on humility. And I reference this passage a lot, but in 1 Peter 5, 6-11, talks about humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. And at the right time, he will exalt you. At the right time, he will restore you, confirm you, strengthen you, establish you. You may have to suffer a while. Like there's some unpacking that goes in between those verses. But at the right time, he's going to do all these things for you. Your job is to humble yourself. And that was a huge part of the movie where he gets furious at his kids about some things because they were celebrating a win. He was like, you stay humble. To the point of maybe they weren't being proud, maybe they were just celebrating, but he was furious. He's like, if we're not humble, we're not anything. Like, you've got to stay humble. And so he is furious. Like, this humility thing is huge for him. And as he forces his kids to stay humble and to not promote, to not excel, to stay under the radar, they don't have to show everybody their talents yet. And then when the time comes, they are absolutely restored, confirmed, strengthened, established. They are exalted 100% in a time that is right. But he worked on the humility part in the meanwhile. So it's a such an odd kind of thing, because on the one hand he's telling him you're going to be the best in the world, but on the other hand he's going, you stay humble. And there was this kind of odd juxtaposition that he's wrestling with the whole way through, which is where, again, I started with saying he's a very complex character, and some of his stuff sounds like complete madness, and he did seem like an egomaniac. He there were times where he and his wife were arguing because it was so much, it seemed like it was all about his ego. He definitely felt like he was never respected and wanted that for his kids. But some of that is like, were you living through your kids? Did you need to be validated through them? Or were you really doing this for them? Or honestly, how often is it one or the other? Isn't it usually just a mixed boat? And I think he is a very mixed bag. But I also think about how many times the Bible says that those who trust in the Lord will not be put to shame. And again, the movie doesn't say he was trusting in the Lord, but I think even for him, like, if he is a character that in some ways represents God, who had a plan for their life, but waited for that, encouraged them to stay humble and have character and things. But at the end, they were not disappointed because they trusted in his plan. And in the end, and it took years, they could have tried to grab that for themselves, just like David, could have tried to grab the throne for himself. But he was like, no, God said I'll become it. He will make it happen. I'm not going to kill Saul to promote myself. They could have gotten tournaments, they could have promoted themselves, but they waited, humbled themselves under their dad's authority, and at the right time, they were exalted. And they were not put to shame for their trust in their dad in the end. So I'm not saying he's a perfect Christ figure in any way, but there are some really interesting parallels to a lot of different biblical concepts with him, and certainly a lot to talk about. Like, is he crazy? Is he a good guy? Is he just an egomaniac? Like, what do we do with him? Because he is a really complex, complicated character. But hopefully this gives you just some interesting things to think about as you kind of percolate on the movie. But I loved it. I thought it was really intriguing, and like I said, lots to think about. And I always like a movie that gives me lots to think about. So thanks, everybody.